guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing my favorite fantasy romance books that feature shadow daddies. Alright guys, so this video is actually inspired by my Discord. So if you join my Patreon, you will have access to my Discord channel. And over on my Discord channel, I have been making stickers that kind of go with the whole fantasy romance vibe. And my first sticker was actually a Shadow Daddy sticker that I'll leave on the screen. But anyway, after I posted that, I realized that I have read so many amazing fantasy romances that feature heroes that can control the shadows, i.e. shadow daddies. So I figured I might as well make a rec video. I don't see a lot of those out there, and I thought this would just be a really fun, chill video and also kind of help promote my Discord and my Patreon. But anyway, if you are unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about my favorite shadow daddies. So starting off, we have A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, this book is the book that got me into fantasy romance. It is my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. It is just so unbelievably good. If you're unfamiliar with the story, we are following Farah, and she is a human girl that is living on the Fae and human border. Now, one day she ends up going out hunting to try to provide for her family and accidentally kills a Fae, mistaking it for a wolf. Now, because of this, she is then forced to go to the Fae lands and live with the High Lord of the Spring Court for the rest of her days, and the story goes from there. Now, the first book is a bit of a Beauty and the Beast retelling. However, it slowly turns into one of the most epic and amazing romances I have ever read, and just, if you have not read ACOTAR yet, you need to read it. It is just so unbelievably good. But anyway, there are two different shadow daddies in ACOTAR, the first one being Rhysand. Now, when I think shadow daddy, I don't actually immediately go to Rhysand, I actually go to the other one, and that is Azriel. Azriel is Rhysand's spy master, and he is able to manipulate the shadows, and the shadows actually talk to him, which is why he is an amazing spy master. But oh my gosh, he is just a perfect, tortured hero who's misunderstood and scarred, and I just love Az with all of my heart, and I really hope we get Az's romance soon. I know I have a lot of theories on who he's gonna end up with, and please, if you don't mind, leave them in the comments who you think Az's romance is going to be with, because I'm pretty sure I know, but Sarah J. Maas, you know, she always surprises me, so I could be completely off base. But anyway, he is one of my absolute favorite shadow daddies, and like I said, if you have not read this yet, you need to pick it up. And next up, we have Nyktos from A Shadow in the Ember. Now, A Shadow in the Ember is the first book in the prequel series to From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. Now, please, if you plan on reading this prequel series, please read the books in publication order. This is not one of those series where you can pick up the prequel series and then jump into From Blood and Ash. It wasn't meant to be read like that, and it will really, really confuse you. So overall, though, I actually really enjoyed this prequel series. So this is following Seraphina and Nyktos. Seraphina being a girl that has grown up believing that she is going to be the consort to the god of death, I believe, Nyktos. However, on the day that she is supposed to become his consort, Nyktos ends up rejecting her, which then forces Seraphina to live a pretty terrible life because her family feels like she has failed in her only mission to eventually marry Nyktos and then kill him. So slowly, as she grows up and her family treats her more and more terribly, there's an event that takes place, and then Nyktos shows up and decides he is going to take Seraphina as a consort after all, and the story goes from there. Now, like I said, I did really enjoy this prequel series, but I will say as a whole, I have been struggling with the most recent books in the From Blood and Ash series, which is really upsetting to say because I loved the first three books in FBAA so much. However, I do feel like the series 1 has been drawn out a little bit past where it needed to be, and 2, I feel like J-Law is just pumping these books out a little too quickly, so we're losing some of the essence of the characters, which is really upsetting. So I have DNF'd A Fire in the Flesh twice now. I'm gonna try to pick it up again. I really want to read it by the end of February, but we will see what happens. But anyway, I did adore those first few books, so I still highly recommend this series. And if you are looking for a toucher and you die amazing Shadow Daddy, look no further. And if you have been following my channel for a while, you know that these next two shadow manipulators are some of my absolute favorites. We have North and Nox Draven from the Bonds That Tie series. This is a Why Choose paranormal fantasy romance, and it is so unbelievably good. Now, I will say the series has very mixed reviews. I am on the team of I adore it, and it is one of my favorite Why Choose series of all time. If you're unfamiliar with the plot, we are following Oleander, and she lives in a world where people or women will have multiple bonded, which are like their partners, and if you have a full bonded group, you're kind of like powered up. So anyway, Oleander's mother has two bonded, and at the start of the story, Oleander is traveling with her mother and her mother's two bonded, and they seem to be fleeing from something. There is then a car accident where Oleander is the only survivor. Now, instead of going back to her intended bonded, Oleander at this point is not of age, but she is about to be and knows who her bonded are. She decides to instead flee and runs away, never to be seen or heard from, for a few years. Now, her bonded are very upset by this, and they spend a lot of time tracking her down. So really, this first book is when her bonded find her and bring her back to her home kicking and screaming. So this first book is a little bit of a bully romance. The bonded are really resentful of Oleander for abandoning them and not letting them into her life and finding out like what is troubling her. But also there is the romance, and it is just so good. And I will say this is the most fleshed out, I feel, with Why Choose Romance in terms of the love interest. I feel like all the guys, you can tell them apart so easily. Every book spends a lot of time with an individual bond, so you really get to know them and you love them as a whole. I know for a lot of people, Why Choose, sometimes they're not a fan because it doesn't have that like fated mate feel. However, with this, I completely felt like all of these people were meant to be together, and my two absolute favorites were Nox and North, and they happen to be the two bonded that are able to manipulate the shadows. They can even turn their shadows into little puppies that guard and or unalive people. So I loved them. They also have more of like the whole tortured hero thing going on, which I feel like a lot of the books I'm about to talk about also have. But overall, I love this series so much and highly recommend. And of course, I had to include the Darkling from Shadow and Bone. I was one of those people that completely shipped the Darkling and Alina. However, I know there's a lot of people that are not Team Darkling, but he is another one of those like tortured, amazing characters that I could not get enough of. If you are unfamiliar with the Shadow and Bone series, I gotta be honest, it has been quite a while since I read this, and I also have watched the TV show much more recently than I read this series, so I don't remember what is TV show and what is actual book, so I apologize for that. But from what I remember, we are following Alina, who didn't believe that she possessed any power, only to discover that she's actually a sun summoner, which is like one of the highest power of Grisha, which is like the magical grouping of people in this world. So she ends up training with other Grisha, despite the fact that most people start training when they are rather young. She's actually a full-grown adult. Now, she had a best friend her entire time growing up as an orphan named Mal. Mal does not possess any power and is very upset when he finds out that Lena is going to go and train with the Darkling and all of the other Grisha. Now, the main Grisha is the Darkling. He has the power to manipulate shadows and pretty much just summon darkness, and it kind of goes from there. But I really enjoyed this. Now, is it my favorite fantasy romance? No, I do see some issues with it. I will say Six of Crows by the same author is phenomenal and one of my favorite YA fantasies ever. This was still very enjoyable though, and I've been meaning to continue with this series. I know there have been other books that are like a spin-off that I own, I just haven't picked up yet, King of Scars and another one that hopefully I'll pick up soon. If you've read them, let me know what you think down in the comments below and if you think I'd enjoy them. But overall, if you want to dip your toes into Shadow Daddy that's not too spicy, definitely check this series out. All right, I'm gonna be completely honest, I did not remember that the hero in this possessed shadow abilities. However, I posted on my Instagram asking for Shadow Daddy recommendations, and a lot of people said that A Kingdom in Stars and Shadows, which would make sense because it's in the title, that the hero is able to manipulate shadows. So this series, I have a love or hate relationship with. Parts about it I loved, other ones I just felt like the pacing was very, very off, and also the entire second half of this book just devolves into straight smut and not in a fun way. So if you're unfamiliar with The Kingdom of Stars and Shadows, I've read the first 2 books. I haven't gone any further, but the story is following a girl that was born with a birthmark that designates her with having a special type of blood that can power up the Fae. So when our main character is born, her mother agrees that her daughter, will marry the Prince of the Fae when she comes of age. Now, when our main character comes of age, essentially when this book starts, she does not want to go to the Fae lands. However, she really can't do anything about it, and when she gets there, she meets her future husband and is very much not impressed, and then she meets his brother, who's the head of the guard, and there's a little bit of a love triangle at play, and the story really goes from there. Now, I will say, one of those Fae is able to manipulate the shadows, apparently, and I, like I said, really did enjoy the story of this. I just wanted a little less smut and a little bit more story going on towards the end of this. Now, the second book I actually liked a lot more than the first. However, I've heard a lot of people saying that as the series goes, it kind of turns more into like the pacing of this book as opposed to the second book. So I don't know if I'll continue with the series. However, this is very fun and they are very quick reads if you are looking for an entertaining and very spicy fantasy romance. And another one of my absolute favorite Shadow Daddies has to be Xaden Ryerson. Now, say what you will about this book, it is unbelievably popular, and personally, I adore Fourth Wing. Now, I will say I had some issues with Iron Flame in terms of pacing and just overall length. However, I love this series so much and cannot wait to continue. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Fourth Wing, and I feel like everyone has read this book at this point, we are following Violet Sorrengail, who was born with an illness that causes her ligaments and her limbs to be very weak. So she grew up believing that she was going to become a scribe. That is until she comes of age, and her mother tells her that no daughter of hers is going to join the scribe quadrant and is instead going to become a dragon rider, one of the most dangerous jobs in this book. Now, this book is essentially just following Violet as she tries to survive against other cadets in this dragon rider university, where she hopes to survive long enough to eventually bond with a dragon and gain magical ability. Now, there's a character, Xaden Ryerson, who I love with all of my heart. He is my favorite character in this book, and he is able to manipulate the shadows, and he also has all of those beautiful Toucher and You Die vibes that I just love him so much. And like I said, one of my absolute favorites. So if you haven't read this yet, I think you should give it a chance. Definitely try it out. Overall, I just can't wait for book 3 to release. And this next character, I debated adding to this list because he doesn't really manipulate shadows. He more manipulates decay, but it had the same kind of vibe. And he's definitely like the dark, angry, misunderstood character in this series. So we have Gild, and this is by Raven Kennedy. I had so many issues when I first tried reading this book. I started this book and DNF'd it 5 times, only to finally get through it and then binge the rest of the series and just love it so much. I understand now why this first book is so frustrating, and it's mostly frustrating because of the main character, but the beauty of this series is that you get to see the main character slowly come into herself and gain her autonomy and her independence, and it's beautiful to watch. But overall, I love this so much. So this story is following RN, and it's kind of like a King Midas reimagining, and RN lives in Midas's castle, and she is gold touch. So like the original story, everything Midas touches turns gold, and he has gold touched RN. So she essentially just lives in a gilded cage that Midas likes to show off, and all she cares about is pleasing Midas and not leaving her cage. So that all changes when she is forced to move to another kingdom and ends up being kidnapped, and the story really goes from there. So the Shadow Daddy or Decay Daddy in this series is Commander Rip, and he is one of the people responsible for kidnapping RN. And you will find out so much more about him as the series progresses, but overall, I love him with all of my heart, and he is my favorite character, or one of my favorite characters in this series. So definitely give this series a shot if you have not picked it up yet. The 5th book has released. I have not picked it up because the audiobook is not available, but I plan on reading it as soon as that audiobook drops. And another character that I completely forgot could manipulate shadows is Rune from Crescent City. Now, I just did my reread of Crescent City 2, and that is when I realized that Rune is able to use shadows in order to cloak his appearance and hide himself from enemies. I completely forgot he was able to use shadows, which even more strengthens a theory I have in regards to Rune's heritage or ancestry. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about that now, but overall, if you're unfamiliar with the Crescent City series, the first book is Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, and we are following Bryce Quinlan. Now, Bryce Quinlan lives in the world of, or the city of Lunathian, and she is a half-fae, half-human. Now, Bryce ends up, or she has three best friends, Danica, Juniper, and Fury Axtar, and one night they all go out partying, and when Bryce returns home, she is greeted with a very horrific scene, and then after that, Bryce realizes that she has to solve a murder because someone very close to her has been killed. So Bryce ends up teaming up with Hunt Athalar, a fallen angel, and together they try to solve this murder, and the story goes from there. I have a full recap of book 1 and book 2 that I'll leave in the cards and in the description if you want to check out those recaps before reading Crescent City, House of Flame and Shadow, which is releasing on January 30th, probably before this video comes out. But anyway, I am so excited to read that book, but if you are looking for one of the sexiest and tattooed and bad boy shadow daddies, definitely check out Rune from Crescent City. And next up, we have Death from Belladonna by Adalyn Grace. So this book released in 2022, and it was one of my favorite books of that year. The sequel, Foxglove, came out in 2023, and unfortunately, that one didn't really work for me. But I still love the Shadow Daddy featured in this book so much. If you are unfamiliar with the story, we are following Signa Faro. At the very beginning of our story, Signa is just a baby, and her mother takes her to this very grand party. And at this party, everyone ends up passing away from poison, and Death shows up in corporeal form, ready to usher their souls into the afterlife. Now, when Death goes to take baby Signa's soul, he realizes that he can't take her soul, and instead is able just to see into her future. And he becomes very intrigued by the fact that this human seems to be immortal, and decides to follow her as she is growing up. Now, Signa ends up being known as being cursed because all of her guardians that mistreat her end up passing away rather suddenly. And also, the townspeople realize that there have been instances where Signa should have passed away and instead somehow survived. So eventually, some very distant relatives ask Signa to live with them, and when Signa gets there, she realizes that there might be something going on in terms of the house possibly being haunted, one of the family members being very sick, and Signa, along with Death, try to discover what is actually happening, and the story goes from there. But I love Death's character in this so much, just because he is trying to keep his distance from Signa and let her live a normal life, but also he is so just intrigued and interested in her, and overall, this story had the perfect amount of like gothic vibes and also really unsettling moments, but also a beautiful romance. So I highly recommend. And these last two books I have not read yet. However, I posted on my Instagram asking for Shadow Daddy Rex, and you guys did not disappoint. So a lot of you said His Darkest Temptation by Tiffany Roberts, and apparently this is a literal Shadow Daddy where the guy does not have a corporeal form. He is just created from shadows, and I am so going to pick this book up in February. It sounds really good, and I already know I love Tiffany Roberts' writing, so I'm so excited. But this is apparently following a girl who is trying to escape her abusive husband, and she ends up hiding out in this cabin in the woods, and when she gets there, she ends up meeting a shadow entity named Cruz, who, like I said, is created from like shadows and mist, and it is their romance. And I am so intrigued and excited to pick up this series. And last up is the first book in a fantasy romance series, and it is What Lies Within Masks and Shadows. Now, I don't know very much about this, however, the cover is stunning, and it sounds pretty good, so hopefully I will be picking up this series soon. But this is following a girl who is apparently forced into marriage with a guy that treats her pretty terribly, and then somehow ends up partnered with this reluctant prince who also seems to have a tortured hero complex kind of going on, and I'm assuming it's going to be their romance. But like I said, I actually didn't look too in-depth on what this book is about because I found that anytime I look at Goodreads reviews, especially recently, I seem to get spoiled. Like, I feel like Goodreads reviews used to just kind of give you like cliff notes and like not a lot of information, but they've kind of turned into summarizing like everything that happens in a book to the point where I don't feel like I need to read the book. So I'm sorry that that wasn't a very good synopsis of what the book is about. However, I have had friends that have read the series, so I know that it is pretty good and I'm very excited to pick it up. Alright guys, those are some of my favorite fantasy romance shadow daddies. Please let me know down in the comments below who is your favorite shadow daddy, or if there's a book recommendation that features a shadow daddy that I didn't talk about, please leave it down in the comments below. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to my paladin protectors, Amanda and Aaron. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post videos every Wednesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye!